Recording? Yes, it is. Okay, it's on and recording for those of you that aren't here. Okay, all right. So let's start off by. Is that a working one, or is that one? Can you write on this?
No, you write on the long, skinny ones.
On the long, skinny ones.
Yeah.
Okay.
That one is the projector.
Yeah. You don't want to write on there, you can't get it off.
That one?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So that's, for those of you that can see, that's me writing my name. For those of you that can't see, you can't see anything.
Right.
However, I will 0418 823
Well, that's handy.
248.
You sure you want to give out your number?
I'm happy to give out my number. I'm
So
here.
you're the dollar friend, are you?
You know what the tax man says? I'm here to help you.
Oh,
Well,
that's what help is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, all right. No, I am here to try and help you. So, why am I here tonight, and what are we going to do over the next 2 weeks? Okay. A long, long time ago, longer than any of you in this room were born. Sure. Yes. Right. So that's giving you a bit of a clue as to how long ago I'm talking. I was the youngest conveyancer in the world.
Oh my God.
Right? Interesting story. In those days, you could not be a conveyancer until you turned 21. And I joined a well-known real estate firm in South Australia, and I was only 17. And I spent a year learning about what they did. They were a well-known family firm in those days. And after about a year, it was suggested that I might want to think about studying conveyancing. And in those days, it wasn't called conveyancing. It was called land brokering.
Yes.
You know, that's what we were. We were land brokers. And they said, look, you've got a few years because nobody does it in the first year. You go and do it. And you'll study it one night a week, and you'll maybe take 2 or 3 years to pass, and then when you pass, all will be good. So, okay, there were 2 of us in this firm. This firm used to take on apprentices. Unheard of today in the real estate industry, but this family, they took on every year, they took on someone who'd come out of school, or maybe a year or 2 out of school, and they joined this firm, and they taught them everything there was to know about real estate from the ground up. So I was one of those, and there was another guy, and his name may or may not mean anything to you. He went on to become a very, very famous footballer in South Australia. His name was Brenton Adcock, and he was from the Adcock family, and they were real estate based. But Brenton was a really, really great sports person, and he won lots of awards, and he was an All-Australian, and he played for Sturt for many, many years. Anyway, he worked with this firm. He and I worked together. And we were young, and, no one was going to tell us. So when they said nobody passes it in the first year, we said, oh, no, there's a challenge. What are we going to do with that? So one night a week, we'd go, and in those days, the Registrar General was our lecturer, right? Mm-hmm. We were taught from the very, very top. Yeah. But the whole land brokers course was only a 12-month course, right? What you guys do over how many? 3 years? Right? They did in 1 year. So we did this whole course. We went down to what used to be called the Institute of Technology, which really was the forerunner of TAFE. It became TAFE, right? But it was down on North Terrace and where the university is now. We'd go there once a week, and we'd have a 3-hour lecture at night, and we'd go home, and we decided, okay, we're going to, so one night a week, and then it got to be 2 nights a week, we'd meet, and we'd study what we'd done that week. And we went, and came the end of the year, we sat for the exam, and this course that nobody had ever passed in the first year, Brenton got 76%, he got a credit, right? And I got 75.5, and I was so angry, he beat me by half a mark. But we both passed in our first year. Now, he was older than I. He was 19, right? But I was only 17. And they said, well, you can't be a land broker yet. You're too young to handle trust money. So we said, what are you going to do? So they worked it out that if my father signed a bond for £5,000, he had to sign a bond to say he was good in case I ran off with the trust account because I was only a youngster, right?
Yeah.
So on that basis, they let me be a land broker. And so at 18, nobody else could be a land broker till they were 21. So for 3 years, and they were the only place in the world where, at that stage where there were land brokers, was South Australia. So I could honestly say, and still I can say, I was the youngest land broker in the world for 3 years. And then I turned 21 and other people studied underneath me, and so it wasn't the same. But Bill Moore knows this story, right? So Bill and I used to train for TAFE in the real estate salesperson's course, and that's where I met Bill. And he said to me, would you be happy to train a bit of what you do to the conveyancers? And I said, yeah, sure, I've been a conveyancer. So that was how I told him I understood that. And how I have a seat. Anyway, sorry if I'm sitting on your desk. So that was it. Bill asked me, okay. And so what I do now is I'm a business broker. And again, it's one of these very unusual occupations. There are 5,000 salespeople, real estate salespeople in South Australia who hold a licence to sell real estate, either as salesmen or as managers. There's approximately 5,000. It's going to get a few more this year because now all the property managers have got to become licensed, which they didn't have to be licensed before. So there'll be probably about 5,500 people in South Australia will hold a real estate salesperson's licence. Now, under the law, you're worried it might be dirty?
No, there was. It looked like somebody put their shoe on there or something. It was quite dirty.
Okay. It wasn't me sitting on it.
No.
Okay.
It looked like boot marks or something.
All right. So, under South Australian law, anybody who holds a real estate licence, real estate salesperson or manager's licence in South Australia, is allowed to sell anything. In some of the other states, in the eastern states, you have to have different licences to sell. In South Australia, one licence only. So that means there's about 5,500 people who are legally licensed to sell businesses. I mean, is there anybody in this room, if I say Westfield Shopping Centre, does anybody not know what I'm talking about? Anyone who's never been in a Westfield? Okay, you've all been. So you understand. You go into a Westfield, all those little shops, right? They're my clients. I don't sell houses, don't sell blocks of land, don't sell blocks of flats. I only sell businesses, right? And in the whole of South Australia, 5,500 people who are licensed and allowed by the law to sell any type of real estate. Do you know how many of them specialise in selling businesses?
One.
No. That would be good if it was only one. Yeah, if I was the only one, it'd be fabulous. It's a bit more than that, but not a lot more. It's about 30. 30.
In comparison to houses, it's...
Comparison, yeah. I mean, the other 5,000 are all selling houses, right?
Yes.
So why is it that there is such a small number who do what I do? Well, if you think about a shop...
Too difficult.
Yeah, but why is it difficult?
Because it's to do with lease, isn't it? More leasing.
It is to do with leasing. You've got to have a lease. There's no title. I mean, think about Westfield. That's the classic example. Think about a Westfield shopping centre and those little shops that are in there. What exactly have they got?
Yeah.
Do they own the real estate?
No.
Westfield's own the real
Yeah.
estate. So what have they got? They've got a lease, right? For maybe 5 years. And some of those leases have got in them that it says at the end of the 5 years, if they paid the rent on time and done everything, they can renew it for another 5 years. But they've only got a lease, okay? What do they own?
No.
Well, yeah, that's the point. Now, what is goodwill?
Your loyal customer base and your reputation.
Your loyal customer base and your reputation, right? Is that something that you can actually pick up, put in a bag and take to your bank manager and say, look, I'd like you to lend me money? This is the problem. What most people say is that what I sell is thin air, right? Well, think about it. Goodwill is based on a reputation, doing the right thing by people. So I've run this business I've got behind me that you can see, I've run this business for 20 years. And I've been honest, I've been good, I've given good customer service, all of that People love me. They come from all over Adelaide to my business because they know I'm a really, really good business owner and I run it well. And then I get tired. I'm ready to retire. So I sell it. Right? What am I selling? I'm selling my reputation. I'm selling my records. Okay? And I sell that to somebody else. And they're not as experienced. And they're maybe not quite as good on customer service. And they're not quite as good as being a business manager. So maybe I have sold this business to those people for $400,000. And you're not here to learn about business sales, so I'll just simply tell you, the way businesses are valued is all based on their profit, right? The profit that they show the taxman. Now, most small businesses make extra profit over what they show the taxman, right? Not every dollar that comes over the counter ends up in the till. In most small businesses, it's one for the taxman and one in my pocket, and one for the taxman and one in... That's how many businesses... But eventually they must show the taxman something. So whatever it is that they show the taxman, that's how the people that are buying it work on valuing it. So not on the money that they can't see, but on the money that they can see. So they work out, and we'll just say I've sold this business for $300,000 based on the tax returns that I've shown to the buyer. So there's my last 3 years' tax figures. You can see what this business has made, and based on that, I'm asking this. And he looks at it and says, yep, fine. But if he's not quite as good, and he's not, as customer-wise, and he doesn't handle his stock, and he doesn't buy at the right price, there's all sorts of different reasons why businesses may or may not do well. That $300,000 that he paid, of which maybe $50,000 was the things you could see, the carpet on the floor, the shelves, the displays. You can see that, and that you can understand where the money is. But the other $250 that he paid for goodwill, he doesn't run it well. What happens to that goodwill? Gone. Right? So do you think banks are very happy to lend people who buy businesses money? No. They won't lend money. Banks won't lend money for somebody to buy a business. You own a house and you say, here's my house, you can take a mortgage on my house and I'll use that money to buy the business. They'll do that. But they won't say use the business as their security. So it becomes harder. As I said at the beginning, what I'm really doing to you to buy is I'm selling air. Right? I'm selling something that most people cannot see. They understand it's there, but they can't actually see it. So because of that, it's considered difficult, okay? And therefore such a small number of people do it. However, as conveyancers, you are going to find things that will happen. There's two things that will happen. Either one of the agents that does specialise in the sale of businesses will bring a contract to you and say, I need you to settle this. And it's quite a lot different from the contract for the sale of a house. Right? Or two people will walk into your office one day and say, I'm Bill, this is Fred, we're next door neighbours, I own a business, Fred wants to buy it, we've agreed a price, will you please write up a contract? There's no agent involved, will you write up a contract? So they're the two things that can happen. So over the next 2 weeks, what I'm going to talk to you about, and we'll probably cover lots of other little things as well, because I tell stories, that's how I talk and how I train, and so we'll cover all sorts of different things. But what I'm going to talk to you about is what the Act, the Land and Business Sale and Conveyancing Act, what does that say about the sale of businesses? From a conveyancer's point of view, what do you need to understand, okay? We're going to look at, how far into the course are you?
This is week 5. So we pretty much, what we've done...
Year 1, year 2?
Sorry.
Beginning of this year.
For most of you, this is the beginning. Oh, you're in 3rd year. So some of you are at different stages. Okay, all right. How many of you know what a Form 1 is? In the sale of property, a Form 1.
Yes, we've covered that.
You've done that. Okay, good. So you understand, a Form 1 is a disclosure statement, right? That's what it is. In the sale of property, the form, there is a disclosure statement in the sale of businesses, and that's called a Form 2. Right? So the Form 1 is for real estate, the Form 2 is the disclosure statement for businesses. Tonight, what we're going to talk about together, what we'll cover tonight, is the Act, what the Act says about the sale of businesses that you need to understand as a conveyancer, and what the Form 2, the disclosure statement about businesses says. And that's what we'll do tonight. Next Wednesday, I'm going to give you all a copy of the 2 contracts. If a real estate agent sells a business, they will use the Real Estate Institute's contract for the sale of businesses. So therefore you might see that document if an agent brings it to your office. If the clients come on their own and there's no agent involved, well, the Australian Institute of Conveyancers have a contract for the sale of businesses where there is no agent involved. So that's another document that you might see from time to time. So we're going to look at those 2 documents next week. And that's really what we're going to cover between us over these 2 nights. Everything that you need to understand and know about the sale of businesses. So it will be amazingly interesting, and you will sit there glued to your seats because you'll be so fascinated by what we're talking about, I'm sure. Hopefully. Now, Bill left me a couple of things. Last week, you just said, he did Form 1s with you, did he? So, he didn't give you one. He's asked me to give.
Oh, no, they're the answers. Is it the answers we're going to...
Please hand out to students from last week. That's what he's written on it. A Form 1, it's a specimen example.
Yeah, that's right. Remember, we're going to check the homework and then we're going to check it off.
Okay, so here you go. First thing we're doing tonight,
Thank you very much.
is there's one each for each of you of
Thank you
the...
so much.
Okay, I see how much of bulk stuff. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, yes, so this is the example. Oh, that's right. That's okay, so then we can check off.
So there's obviously a couple of people. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And Bill said he thought there should be 11. So there you go. So there's a couple of people aren't here yet. Okay. All right. That's all of that. It's still recording. Okay, now. All right, so let's deal with... Here we go. Let's deal with... I even have a pen. Week 5, that's week 5. Okay. Now, how does this work? Okay, so I've got to assume the first name is your surname and the next name is your first name. So we have, is it Nashiket Atali? Not here? No. Okay. Wissam Farid. That is you, sir. Thank you. You're here. Jane Humphrey is not here. Martha Ionides. Ionides.
That's all right, yeah, Ionides.
That's you.
Yes.
Close.
That's good.
Now, Pramikant, I know that from last time, yes? We've talked about that, and I have spoken with Pramikant and marked Pramikant's papers in another subject. Now, I have Mr. Poon Kut.
Yes.
That is you. Thank you. Emma Laney is not here. In fact, Emma hasn't been here at all, has she? No, she hasn't ticked anything. Mr. Bo Lee, thank you. Julie Marjanovic, that's you, Julie, there. Despina Scragg, that is you. And Girish, you're here. Yes, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, that's my fault. I forgot to turn my phone down. I can't answer that. It's one of my clients, but I can't talk to him right now. So what did we say? 3, 6, 8, and I've got 8 there. Yep, okay, so that is all good. Alrighty, so what are we going to look at? We're going to start off with the Act. Okay. Now, fascinate one for each of you and then we'll talk about it. When it comes to real estate in South Australia, there are a lot of different acts that one way or another can have an effect on the way real estate is conducted. from the point of view of people who are involved in the sale of real estate, the most important act, and I use the word, when I say the word important, I mean because it says what they can and cannot do, what they are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do, is the act I have just given you, which is called the Land and Business Sale and Conveyancing Act of 1994. How many of you currently work in the conveyancing industry or real estate in your daily jobs? Anyone? No. So, okay, so a lot of what you're studying, it's fairly foreign to you from a normal day-by-day basis. Okay, that's fine. So, this, from my point of view, or from anybody in real estate's point of view, this is a very, very important act. It really spells out what we can and we can't do. And there's some hefty fines. When you have a look at it, you'll see that there are fines in there of up to $20,000 if a salesperson does the wrong thing for certain things. Now you look at the back page of the one I've given you, and I think, well, my version has got 44. What's the number on the back page?
46.
46, okay. Which sounds a lot of pages, right? But if you actually look at it, what you'll discover is that the last 3 or 4 pages are just telling you about all the different changes that there have been to this Act over the years. Amendments. And in fact, if you keep turning back, what you'll find is the last page where there's any writing on is page 39. And in fact, on page 39, there's only one line of writing, right? So it's really, there's 38 pages, except there's not, because if you go to the front, the first 2 pages are just telling you all the different things that are in the Act. So you can take some, it comes down to being 36 pages big, or short, or small, whichever way you look at it, that this Act is, okay? Now, in those 36 pages, there are 42 sections. If you look back to the last page where there's any writing on, which I said was about page 38. Yes, it is, page 38. On page...
We've got to section 42 reviews of apartments.
Section 42. What page is that on for you?
Page 40.
Page 40. Okay, sorry. Slightly different version. Okay, so page 40 is the last section of the Act, and that is section 42. Right? So this whole document, which is approximately 30-something pages long, has 42 different sections in it. Of those different sections, 4 relate to the sale of businesses. Right? The other 38 relate to the sale of property. So think about this. If you are going to be a conveyancer who's going to be involved settling contracts that are about the sale of houses or land, you probably need to know what's in those 38 sections, because this is the Act that says what the real estate agents are and are not allowed to do. And if you're a conveyancer settling their sales, you need to know whether or not they're acting within the law. If you're going to be settling the settlement of businesses, right, there's only 4 sections that you need to worry about. And because that's what I'm talking to you about tonight, those are the 4 sections that we're going to talk about, right? But because I think it's really, really important that if you're going to be a successful conveyancer, you do need to understand the Act. That's why I always say to Bill, when I do this lecture, I want you guys to have a copy of the Act that you can keep, right? To take away and keep. So that's it. That's yours. You've got it now. And it's yours to keep forever. And you can stick it in your drawers. And when you start acting in conveyancing, there'll always be things you need. Oh, I wonder if that's... Got a copy of the Act to look it up. However, so let's start right at the beginning. Probably about page 5, there is section 4. You're way in front of me, aren't you?
Sorry, I'm just scanning through.
No, that's fine. I have no problems with that. Yeah. Section 4 is the first section that we're going to talk about. Now, if I said to you, I want you to, you've got a minute, think about this for a minute, and then I'm going to pick someone, I'm going to ask them to stand up and to explain to me, what do you think the word business means, right? Do you think if I gave you a minute or two to do that, you could probably think of something that means what does business mean? I'm sure you could, because I'm not going to do it, don't worry about it, but I just want you to think it's not that difficult a word to understand, business, right? So, but the Act here doesn't just talk about a business. The Act says this Act relates to a small business. Now, last week, Bill talked to you about a Form 1, right? A Form 1 is a disclosure document that's issued in the sale of real estate, right? Did Bill say that you don't issue that document if it's a very expensive house? If it's over $1 million, do they get a Form 1?
We didn't talk about that.
Didn't even discuss that? Okay. Well, okay, then I'll answer the question. The answer to the question is yes. Does not matter in general real estate how much. I mean, there was something in the paper in the last couple of weeks about the most expensive property in South Australia for about $7 million.
Yeah.
Someone who can afford to spend $7 million on a house still gets a Form 1, a disclosure statement that tells them what the council say, what the environmental people, everything about the property they're buying. They still get that regardless of whether they're spending $100,000 on a block of land or $5 million on an apartment. They still get that information. In businesses, it's a bit different. What the government said way back, and I'll tell you how far back, right, was that they were only going to make it applicable to small businesses. So, what's a small business? I filled that one up. I'm going to use this one. Okay.
Not exceeding 300,000.
Not exceeding 300,000.
That's all.
The regulations say some of them are fixed by regulation.
Way back in the year 1973, right? South Australia had a premier, a man called Don Dunstan.
Yeah,
Right? Some of you remember that name. Okay. Dunstan was a man who was a very fair person. A lot of Australians remember Dunstan for doing some strange things. He believed that Australia is a country where we get a lot of heat, right? In England, when politicians go into the Houses of Parliament in England, it's cold, and they wear suits and ties and all of that. He said, that's England. But just because it's in England and we're in Australia, we don't have to be exactly the same. So he said, really, when we're in the middle of an Adelaide summer and it's 40 degrees, politicians should be allowed to walk into the Houses of Parliament in Adelaide wearing shorts or short sleeves.
Safari suits used to be popular for me.
That's what he did. He set a fashion of going into Parliament wearing safari suits, which are shorts and short sleeve jackets. He said, this is more appropriate for Australia. Right? And he did some other things that were a bit sort of publicity type. And so a lot of people thought of him, he's a bit of a wanker. He just wants publicity for himself. But he wasn't just that, right? He wasn't. He was a very, very believing politician. And he said that there's lots of areas where people like you and I, when we go and do business with somebody, the other person has got a lot more knowledge than we have, right? We're actually at a disadvantage. You go and buy a car. The car salesman knows all about that car. We don't know about that car. They can trick us. The same with real estate. The same with when you go and buy things from a shop. The salespeople might know something, and if they don't... So consumer protection legislation was what he brought in. So back in 1973, he introduced into South Australia a whole range of consumer protection legislation, which some of it related to real estate. So back in 1973, for the very first time, you got a disclosure statement. When you bought a house, there was a disclosure statement. And what did you get? What does the buyer of a property get with a disclosure statement? What's one of the things that gives them?
All the information regarding the house.
Right, and if they don't like the information, what can they do?
They can, as in, call
Cool off. Cool
yeah.
off, right?
Yeah.
So this was the beginning of a concept that if you weren't happy with the information in a certain amount of time, you had the legal right to cool off, right? 1973. By the way,
Calling off, is that when that
that's
came
when
in?
that came in, when this whole new change in
So
legislation.
prior to that,
There was no cooling off.
So you bought a property, you signed it and said, that's it, bad luck.
That was it, bad luck.
Really?
Yep. So as of 1973, cooling off.
Yeah, okay.
2019, today.
Was
If
that
I-
earlier in other states?
So, that's what I'm about to tell you. Queensland, cooling off? No. New South Wales, cooling off? No. Victoria, cooling off? No. West Australia, cooling off? No. South Australia, nearly 50 years later, is still the only state in Australia where when you buy property, you get a cooling off. You have to be given a statement by the vendor, right? And you get a cooling off. It is still, right? That's how far ahead of things Dunstan was, okay? So, in 1973, he brought this in. At the same time, he decided that he would give this same level of protection to people who were going to buy a small business. He said, if you had enough money, or this thinking was, if you had enough money to buy a bigger business, you probably had enough money to hire some accountants and hire some lawyers, and they would check everything out. But for mums and dads just buying a small business, they needed to be protected. So in 1973, they defined a small business as a business that sold for $30,000 or less, back in 73. Now, if you look at the top of the page of this Act, what's the date? At the top of the page.
1994.
1994. Which happens to be 21 years, right? From when the Act first started. In that 21 years, the definition of a small business changed 5 times. 75,000, 90,000, 150,000, and in 1994, the definition of a small business was up to $200,000. Okay? Despite the real estate agents, conveyancers, and a lot of other people appealing to the government, it was another 21 years, 2015, before that figure was changed again. And the figure that you've got in front of you in section 4
$300,000.
is $300,000, right? It took 21 years for the government to change that figure. The industry, conveyancers, people in real estate said to the government, that figure really, just if you think about the way living has risen, that figure really today should be $500,000 to be the same as it was back then, right, in 1973. New South Wales is trying to bring an Act in that will be a bit like our Act, that will bring in cooling off. We'll have their definition of a small business is $1 million, right? If you buy a business less than $1 million, then they say you should be protected. At the moment, in South Australia, if you buy a business that's less than $300,000, you are protected, and we'll talk about how you're protected. If you buy a business that is more than $300,000, you get no protection from the Act, right? There is no protection. So that's a key number that you guys need to know, because things happen. In the sale of a business, there's a lot of difference between what happens in a business that sells for less than 300 and a business that sells for more than 300. So as conveyancers, and you get a contract arrive on your desk from a broker, or 2 people walk into your office and say, we've agreed this deal, we want you to draw up the contract, and you say, sure, what price? and they say 250, you think, right. They say 350, you think, okay, very different set of circumstances.
So there's no Form 2 that requires Form 2 if it's over the 300,000.
That's exactly what we're going to talk about.
What about calling off, Brian?
Sorry?
What about calling off?
No, if there's no Form 2, there's no calling off.
So that's what you mean when you talk about no protection under the Act.
Yes.
But is there some other Act?
Well, the only other act is if you bought a business for $350,000 and it turned out maybe that the vendor had lied and the figures were not as you thought they were, the only other place you have to go is to the federal court, the ACCC. Right? That's the only other protection there is for the buyer of a business that's over 300. Here, under this Act, there's a lot of things that protect the buyer. And you'll see, we'll talk about those things, right? But if it's over 300 and it turns out there's a problem, that Act says no, you can't use this Act to help you. You've got to go federal court, you've got to use the ACCC Acts to try and sue. So, first situation, Section 4 is the section that defines this whole concept of what is a small business and what is not a small business. Now, there's lots of little bits and pieces about definitions. You know, if you know anything about definitions, you can always interpret different things. For example, if you may never have thought about this, you may never have even looked at an advert for a business that was for sale. But if you did, you would see most businesses are advertised for a figure plus the stock. Right? The stock, when you buy a business, the stock is what they sell in the shops. Okay? So you're paying one price for the goodwill, but you're buying the stock as well. Imagine a dress shop, all the fashion that's in there. Okay? So that's part of what you're buying. But what price do you pay for that? Well, you actually pay what the owner paid. You pay the wholesale figure, because if you sell it, you've got to be able to make some profit. So you can't buy it at retail, or else you won't make any money on it. So, however, when we're saying $300,000, often used to be confusion. Was that including stock or excluding stock? If you read Section 4, they added a new sentence at the very end of Section 4, which makes it very clear that the $300,000 is excluding stock. So it's actually $300,000 that someone's paying for the goodwill.
So you disregard the stock then?
Yes. Yes, if you're working it out.
Yeah.
So if a business is for sale at $250,000
Yes.
with $100,000 worth of stock, right? That means it's $350,000 in total that the buyer is paying. So that's where there used to be confusion. Or is that inside or outside? Now it's very clear.
So
If it's $250 plus stock,
Yeah.
the figure is $250. It's a small business.
So Brian, just to interrupt you again. So we're talking here about excluding GST.
There is no GST.
So that means there's no GST on...
One of the only things in all of Australia
Yeah.
that was determined there would not be GST on was the sale of a business.
Okay.
Right? As long as the business continues to operate from the day the buyer agrees to buy it until settlement. If the owner closes the business down during that time, that's no longer a business. There's GST. But of course, why would you do that? If you've sold a business, you're going to keep it going till the settlement date and you get your money. So it basically means as long as there is no GST payable when somebody buys a business that is being sold at what they call, the tax department's definition is a going concern. It's continuing to operate.
Because they're still going to be getting... GST is still going to be...
Well, there's GST paid on various sales, but not on the actual price of the business. Yeah, so if it sells for in fact, it doesn't matter. The $300,000 figure is not relevant. If you sell a business for $1 million, there's still no GST, right? So there's no GST at all on the purchase price of a business.
So it's just for the business, because with properties it's a different situation.
Very, very different. Lots and lots of things are different between business and properties. Okay?
Thank you.
So that's the other thing. Now you mentioned property, because if you have a look at Section 4, it also says, well, what about the situation where the owner of the business also owns the property? Right? I mean, if I got a phone call when I leave here tonight,
Oh, yes.
Somebody rings me and says, I own a motel at Glenelg. I want you to come and talk to me about selling my motel. And we work out that his motel is worth, because he owns the building, he owns the land, whole thing's worth $3 million. Right? So it's a lot more than 300,000.
Yeah.
Except when you read section 4, what it says is what you have to do is take off the value of the real estate.
Section 2, isn't it?
No, section 4.
4.2. 4.2 as in...
4.2, yes.
To do with the actual land.
Yes, it says take off the value of the property.
Yeah.
So if I'm selling a big motel for $3 million, and the council value says that the value of the land is $2,800,000, so therefore the business is only $200,000, still a small business.
Okay. So you
Still
exclude
a small business, right? Take the land off and see what you're left with as the value of the business. If the business is under 300, still covered by the Act. So that is section 4 of the Act.
Yeah.
It's defining what this is all about. Okay, next section we're going to look at is...
Close to your 45 minutes?
Sorry?
Are you close to your 45?
No, well, yeah, I'm close. I'm on 41. So, yeah, thank you. I'm aware of it. We'll keep an eye on it.
So if you'll ask us to remind you, that's all.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I appreciate that too. So the next section that we're going to look at is section 5 in the Act, which talks about cooling off. Okay, now, I gather last week Bill spoke to you a bit about cooling off. What did he tell you about cooling off? When does cooling off start and how long is it?
Once one is served and
I
clear
don't
2
know.
business days.
And it's
Clear 2 business.
two clear business days. Now, these days business operates from Sunday to Saturday, right? So what does that mean?
Monday to Friday.
Only Monday to Friday. So even though we talk about business days, we don't mean weekends, right? It's Monday to Friday. Okay, good. That's a point to remember. So now, you said it starts when you give the Form 1.
Or the contract signed, whichever is later.
Whichever is later. Very good point, because that's something that lots and lots of people don't understand and make a mistake. And in fact, if you look at the end of this section 5, if you look at the end of section 5, there's a section, part 8 in section 5, and it talks about when the cooling off starts. And you'll see it gives 2 answers. I'm going to stop that now, just for a minute. And then we'll start. Yep, starting again. Perfect. All right, 45 minutes running again now. You'll see it gives 2 answers. It's page 8 in my version, but it's probably page 9 in yours, is it?
Page 8.
Page 8 in yours as well. So it says, in relation to the sale of land, where the vendor's statement, remember the vendor's statement is the Form 1, yeah? Where the vendor's statement is served on the purchaser before the making of the contract, then the cooling off is the end of the second clear business day after the day on which the contract was made. And where the vendor's statement is served on the purchaser after the making of the contract, then it's the end of the second clear business day from the day on which the statement was served. So you were right in what you said. A buyer gets 2 days cooling off, and the beginning of the cooling off is marked by whichever of the 2 documents is the last of the documents, right? Whether it is the contract or the Form 1, whichever one you give to the purchaser last, that's the beginning of the cooling off. That's in relation to real estate. Just look, keep reading, because then it says, in relation to the sale of a small business.
So what section are we on, sorry?
You are on, it's section 5, cooling off, but part 8 of section 5.
So page 8, Julie. Halfway down on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
Got it?
Yeah.
Right, so at top, in relation to the sale of land, and then it says, in relation to the sale of a small business. So the cooling off is the end of the 5th clear business day after the day on which the vendor's statement is served on the purchaser.
So it's nothing to do with the contract here.
So it's nothing to do with the contract. And shortly we're going to look at the Form 2, the vendor's disclosure document, and you'll understand why information that is in that document, it is very, very difficult for a buyer to decide to buy until they have seen that information, because part of the information is all about the figures.
Yes.
The tax figures for the last 3 years. That's what a vendor has to give a potential buyer. And as I said to you before, the whole way people work out what a business is worth is all about the figures. So until they've got the figures, they can't work it out. So that's why it very rarely is that the contract is signed before. They can't really sign a contract until after they've got that information. Okay? So, Section 5 of this Act defines what a cooling off is and when the cooling off starts. And for a business, it's different. It is how many days? 5 clear business days. Now think about that for a minute. We've said that business days does not include the weekend.
Yeah.
But if you think about it,
For land.
for land, yeah, or businesses,
Either.
right? Yeah, no, yeah, either or.
Yeah.
But so to have 5 days, you end up running into a weekend whichever way you start it. Wherever you start, there's a. So the truth is that the buyer of a small business actually gets a minimum of 7 days.
Yeah.
Right? And if there's a public holiday, it could be 8 days.
Yes.
And like when it's Easter, it's about 12 days, right? It never stops. And you think, when is it ever going to finish? But eventually it does finish. So it is 5 clear business days, and you can't do that without getting a weekend involved in there somewhere.
Is the end of the business day taken to be 5 p.m?
No, it starts at midnight and it finishes at midnight, right? So cooling offs are one of those things that when you're coming into real estate, everybody gets very scared. I remember I was around back in 73, and I remember when it came in, and everybody thought this will be awful. You know, you'll have buyers running around putting contracts on 10 houses on the weekend and then cooling off on 9, and it doesn't happen. You speak to most real estate agents and they will tell you if they get 1 cooling off a year, that's a lot, right? People know they've got it. And so because they've got it, real estate people don't tend to push buyers. Now they look, if you're ready to buy, buy. If you're not ready to buy, you're not ready to buy. I'm not going to make you do something you don't have to do. So the truth, and the same in businesses, so the truth is, even though we've got this, and probably because we've got the cooling off, so therefore there's a lot less pressure used in the selling in South Australia than if you were selling in Queensland or Sydney, where there is no cooling off. They still do use a lot more pressure in those places, but we don't. Now, Section 5 has got one other thing that you guys need to be aware of, especially when you are preparing contracts. Now, you may not know this. I'll ask the question, and it's nothing to be concerned about if you don't know it. When a buyer signs up to buy a house, before the cooling off has finished, how much deposit is a buyer allowed to put down before the cooling off has finished?
$100.
No more than 100.
Okay, so you've obviously had this discussed.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the difference then between that and the sale of a business?
It says not exceeding 10% of the total consideration.
That's correct. So in the sale of a business, a buyer can put down a 10% deposit immediately. In the sale of real estate, he cannot. The law says he can only pay. So what do most real estate agents do? Do they ask for $100?
No.
They don't, right? They normally say, in the contract, you're to pay 10% deposit due at the end of the cooling off. Okay? Now, what that is important is that you will not only in business sales, but also in a lot of time in house sales, probably for most conveyancing firms, 30 or 40% of their work is from what they call private sales, where there is no agent, right? And the two people come to your office and say, we've agreed a deal, we want you to draw up the contract, and you're allowed to do that, and you're allowed to charge them a fee. But particularly in houses, the owner may say, we've agreed he's going to pay me $10,000 deposit. In fact, he gave it to me last night. I've got the $10,000. Now, instantly, the contract is illegal, right? Because he's not allowed. So, as conveyancers, you do need to be very aware and cautious of the fact that the law, there are some rules about how much deposit a vendor or an agent can ask for prior to the calling off. So $100 only for houses, 10% of the price, that's the total price, so that would include the stock as well in that particular case, of the business if they choose to. All right, so that's now Section 5. We've dealt with the two things that are in Section 5. Now, last week, Bill talked to you guys about a Form 1. And you knew when I said to you, it's called a vendor statement. So he's probably... Did he show you Section 7 of the Act? No? All right, there it is on the page, whatever your page is, page 9, maybe. Section 7. The particulars to be supplied to a purchaser of land before settlement. What's important are the first 5 words. First 5 words say, a vendor of land must. Right? So according to the Act, the law says the owner of the property must give the information. So that is why it's called a vendor's statement, because the law puts the responsibility to do it on the vendor. Right? Now, within the industry and as conveyancers, you will learn to call it a Form 1. Everybody calls it a Form 1. But it's when you read a document like this and that, its correct title, and that's when they say they're talking about a vendor's statement. As much as what's a vendor's statement? Vendor statement is a Form 1. It's a disclosure document, and it's called that because that's what the Act says. But we're not looking at that. We're looking over the page today. We're looking at Section 8. Right? Section 8 is the particulars to be supplied to the purchaser of a small business before settlement. But the same words at the beginning. A vendor of a small business must. So, this means that, once again, this is a vendor's statement. So within the law, and this Act about the sale of property and businesses in South Australia, there are 2 vendor's statements. The first one that most people are very familiar with relates to the sale of land and is called a Form 1. The second one that relates to the sale of businesses, and guess what that's called? Absolutely. Government thinking. So Form 1, Form 2. So the Form 2, if you hear people talking about a Form 2, this is what it is. Section 8 of the Land and Business Agents Act, it's talking about what information the owner of a business must give to the potential buyer before they buy. So the first thing it says, at least 5 clear business days before the date of settlement, give to the purchaser a statement in the form required by the regulation which sets out, and it gives a few things that have got to be in it. A, the rights of the purchaser under Section 5. Section 5 is what we just looked at, calling off. So the statement has to tell the purchaser you are entitled to a calling off. In exactly the same way as it does in the Form 1, it does that in the Form 2. Except, of course, it says 5 days, not 2. Secondly, it says the prescribed particulars in relation to the business. Prescribed particulars is a legal term which means the answer to a whole series of questions. Now, in the Form 1 that you did last week, how many questions were there? It's about 69 or something, isn't it? And you've got to go through all of the questions and you've got to work out which ones are relevant and which ones aren't, etc., etc. Okay. You don't do that in a Form 2. In the Form 2, there are only 12 questions. Only 12, but you have to answer all of them. Right? You must answer all of the 12 questions. So it makes it a little easier. You haven't got to worry, is this one relevant? They're all relevant, and you've got to give an answer to them all. Right, then it says, where land is sold. Now, I'll tell you that, there are hundreds of businesses sold every year. Most of the businesses that are sold are in places like shopping centres, as we talked about, Westfields. Or, if you live in the east, there are, Norwood Parade or Jetty Road in the Elg or wherever. The streets, the main shopping streets, right? But there are certain businesses, if you think about them. If I owned a caravan park, I probably own the land. If I owned a big hotel, I probably own the land. Out in the country, if I own a motel, I probably own the property. Right? So there are some businesses where the owner does own the property and they sell both. But they're a small number. But if you're looking at a deal where the owner of the land the owner of the business also owns the land, so then you've got to give the buyer both lots of information. The Form 2 gives them the information about the business, and the Form 1 gives them the information about the land. So you give them a combined document, which is both a Form 1 and a Form 2. What's your question?
How long's the cooling off on that one?
Very, very good question. It is the only time you will ever have a cooling off on real estate property that is 5 days. The longer cooling off it prevails on the real estate. So if you do get that situation, you could do the whole of your conveyancing career and never have one, because there's just not a lot of them. But if it ever did happen, yes, that buyer gets 5 days, not only 5 days on the business, they also get 5 days on the land.
And as you said before, Brian, if the land is disregarded in relation to the value of the business,
yes,
right, as in the price.
Yep.
Can I just ask you a question, because this is really, where it says here, like a vendor of a small business must at least 5 key days before the date of settlement. Mm-hmm. Now, we're told that to serve the Form 1 or the Form 2, whichever, do that as soon as possible or when you sign the contract.
Yep.
What is this before the date of settlement? The period, 5 days before the date of settlement?
Because there's a 5-day cooling off. You see, if it was less than 5 days before settlement
is what? Cooling off? Is this related to the cooling off? Or?
No. Settlement of the property. The actual... when the money changes hands.
That could be a month.
Yes, but... Okay.
It's just confusing me.
Okay, well, you've got to understand this. Yeah. We're going to look at what has to be in this Form 2.
Yeah.
What has to be in it is the very, very latest figures. You've got the last 3 years' figures on the business. Now, just say it's right now, beginning of September.
Yes.
Okay? When does the financial year for every business finish?
June 30th.
30th of June.
Yeah.
Okay. How long does it take an accountant to prepare the tax figures for a particular business? Most businesses won't do their tax until Christmas, or even January or February, right? If they're going to owe the taxman money, they're going to delay it as long as possible. So at this time of the year, if we're selling businesses, it's quite possible that the figures to the end of June haven't been finished. So sometimes we have to wait. The buyer signs a contract. He knows what the business is doing, he knows what the figures are. He's happy to sign a contract, but we haven't yet given him the Form 2. So what that is saying is we have to give it to him at the very latest 5 days before he settles. Now, if it can be earlier, it will be. But sometimes if the accountant is slow, we won't have that information to give him the Form 2 till right up to the last moment. So that's why, in order for the buyer to still get their legal 5-day cooling off, we leave it till as late as possible.
But then how come it says all the time settlement takes place?
Yes, because a purchaser can elect to go in front of a lawyer and waive their cooling off. Right?
Yeah, you can do the cooling
You can
off.
do that either for property or for a business. You can go in front of a lawyer and you can waive your right to cooling off. Now,
and even this receive the statement too, isn't it? The Form 1.
Sorry?
Form 2. You can also waive your right to.
You can't waive the right to the Form 1 or the Form 2, but you can waive the right to the cooling off.
Oh, I thought it was.
You must still give them the document, right? But they can decide to let the cooling off go. So that's when that could happen. It could actually be I give them the Form 2 today, settlements tomorrow, and I make them sign in front of a lawyer and they forgo their cooling off. It's very, very rare, but you simply need to be aware there is that ability to do that. You're still concerned?
Because you said the day before, but it says the time settlement takes place, so they could do it the same day.
It could even be the same day.
Or, yeah.
Could even be the same day. Only be the same if they have signed waiving their cooling off. If they haven't waived their cooling off, then settlement has to be deferred for 5 days until they've had that 5 days to decide if they're going to cool off or not. Right? So again, as a conveyancer, that can affect when settlement's going to be, from your point of view. All right, so what else have we got here? So we're down to A, B and C. We're saying if land's being sold, then they have to get all the same questions and all the same information that they do for the normally. And then it's got another thing. It must have attached to it a certificate in a form required by regulation, which is signed by a qualified accountant who is not the owner. So even if the owner is an accountant, they cannot sign this. It has to be an independent accountant, has to give, attached to this vendor statement, the Form 2, giving the purchaser the last 3 years' figures from the tax return. Right? So this is why I said to you, until a buyer has seen this, it is very difficult for them to say how much they think that business is worth if they haven't actually seen the figures. Yes?
Any definition for qualified accountant? Like, who is qualified?
Well, it normally means someone who's a chartered accountant or a registered accountant who holds the certificate to be an accountant in South Australia.
Is there any law require people to have a certificate to be an accountant?
You need to have finished a university. You need to have done a degree.
No, accountant is free. You don't need to registration.
Yeah, no, if you're a chartered accountant, yes.
A chartered accountant is a membership. You can be or be not.
Yes, you don't have to be a chartered accountant, but you do have to have completed a recognised course.
You still have to be qualified to be an accountant.
There's one thing to be a bookkeeper and another thing to be an accountant when you do...
Yes. You can't just walk out, rent an office and set yourself up as an accountant unless you've done a course. Right? You could call yourself a bookkeeper, that's different, but a bookkeeper can't sign this.
That's right.
So
This must be signed. Look, like a lot of the things, they've done away with a lot of licences. You don't know, accountants don't have licences, but to be an accountant, they have to be able to show they've been to a university course and finished that university course. That then gives them the qualifications to be called an accountant. Yeah. So it's a fine line. It is a fine line. But bookkeeper is different to accountant. And this doesn't allow a bookkeeper to sign a Form 2. So from a buyer's point of view, when you're looking at a Form 2, and we're going to look at it shortly, you will see it's got 2 people signing it, saying that it's right. The owner of the business signs it to say that the information is correct. The accountant signs it to say that the financial information is correct. Who doesn't sign it?
The vendor.
No, the vendor signs it.
Oh, the agent?
That's right. I don't sign it. How can I sign something to say that the financial information of somebody else's business is correct? Right? The agent has to sign the Form 1. The agent sends off the searches to the council and all the various people, gathers that information and prepares the Form 1 and signs the Form 1 to say that they've done that. They've sent the information off, they've got the answers back. Real estate agent, yes. But the real estate agent cannot and does not have to sign a Form 2. Right? Only the owner of the business and the account, because they're the 2 people that know the information. I wouldn't know. If I go and talk to someone about their business, I'm not their accountant. I don't see their books. I can't know. They show me their tax figures. I assume that they're right. But I can't sign to a buyer and say, I guarantee these are right, because I don't know. So the interesting thing is a Form 1 is signed by the real estate agent, but a Form 2 is not signed by the business agent. All right, so that is Section 8. So we have Section 4, which defines a small business. Section 5, which gives you the cooling off and all about what a cooling off is. Section 8, which tells you about what must be in the Form 2, the disclosure document. The other section I want you to be aware of is Section 6. A long time ago, yes, quite a long time ago, it was pretty common that real estate developers would get some... Does anybody live up in the hills up near Mount Barker? No? Okay. Out in the northern suburbs, Tea Tree Gully way? Tea Tree Gully, okay. There's land for sale, right, up in these areas. I'm thinking because I drive past Mount Barker a lot, and there's lots of subdivisions and people selling land. Okay. So what used to happen was people couldn't afford to buy blocks of land. So if a developer cut up land, and then they'd put the blocks of land on the market for sale, and on the weekend, people and young couples would drive up and look and say, oh, look, this looks a nice place to live. This land's for sale at £20,000 a block, right? We haven't got £20,000, but what they would say is, okay, put down £100 as a deposit. Every month, you pay another £100, and it will take you 5 years to pay for this block, right? And at the end of the 5 years, you'll own it, and the block will be transferred to you. And most real estate in South Australia was sold that way, right? What they used to call instalment contracts. Like lots of things, you get one bad person spoils everything, right? So there was one or two developers who didn't do the right thing. Somebody paid off over 5 years, £100 a month, £100 a month. Came to the end, they paid $20,000, go to look at their block of land. There's somebody else's house on it. The developer sold it as well to somebody else. Okay? So this happened a couple of times, and people lost their money and big legal disputes and all that. So then the government said, right, we're going to ban, right? We're going to ban buying land on instalments, right? We're going to make it that the maximum number of payments you can make to buy a property are three instalments. That's it. So that was done a long time ago, and nobody thought anything about it. It was fine. These days, everybody understands. Anyone here who doesn't do internet banking, I'm sure you all do a lot of your banking on the net, right? No, okay, well then I'll tell you. If you did do internet banking and you wanted to pay a bill and you wanted to transfer some money from your account to someone else's account, the bank puts a limit on how much money you can do a day. So if you had to pay $20,000, do any of you, what's the limit on your accounts? Do you know? 5,000 is the most common figure. On most banks, they say, we won't let you transfer more than $5,000 in one day. So, someone signs a contract to buy a house, right? And the agent says 10% deposit after the cooling off. Okay, that's fine. So the house is $300,000, 10% deposit, $30,000 deposit due next week. And the buyer goes to the bank and says, well, I want to transfer $30,000 to my agent. The bank says, oh yeah, well look, it's 5,000 a day, so we'll do that each day. It'll take 6 days to pay all of the money across. Section 6 says a contract is void if the deposit is paid in more than 3 payments. Wow. So suddenly, internet banking created a problem that people were paying more than 3 deposits, and therefore their contracts were becoming void. So it's very easy to go to your bank and say, for one day, raise my limit from 5,000 to 30,000, just for today. Transfer 30,000 and then bring the limit back to 5. It's your money, it's your bank. They have to do what you do, and they will do that. Right? But if people didn't realise, Section 6 caused problems. Now, once again, as conveyancers, when you are preparing contracts on behalf of people, you need to recognise that people and make sure the buyers understand when you go to pay that deposit, you have to get your bank to change the rules, or else you may void your contract. So Section 6 is a section that you need to understand. Yes?
Do we need to let them know that they need to do that? Or surely they will be aware?
Not always, that's the problem. Not everyone's aware. If they're not... I mean, people may not buy a house once every 10 years, once every 20 years. They don't know those things. It's not often that you have to go and spend a large amount of money.
No, I'm saying, but if you don't physically tell the purchaser, do not do more than 3 instalments or it's void.
Yes. It's one of the things you should probably have in your standard instructions. If the deposit is more than your bank's limit, you'll need to speak to your bank to raise the limit for the day so that you can pay the deposit. Right? That's all they need to know. That's as simple as that. You just have it in your standard instructions that you give people when they're talking of appointing you as a conveyancer.
So that only applies, obviously, doesn't it, where there's no mortgage or loan involved? And most houses would have a loan or mortgage, wouldn't they?
Because the mortgage is rarely for the 100%.
No,
You still need to pay the deposit.
Still pay the deposit.
Yeah. I mean, there's normally, right, people borrow 60, 70%. So there's still a gap that they're paying themselves between that, what they're borrowing, and the purchase price. So that's where the deposit comes in.
Okay, yeah.
So it can be it's a trap that you just need to be aware of. There is one other clause in this contract, in this act, that you need, again, as a conveyancer, you need to be aware of. And that is clause 15. Clause 15. Which is called remedies. Now, in my version, it's on the bottom of page 13. Where is it on? It's also on the bottom of page 13 in yours. Okay. It's only a little small clause, but it's actually quite significant. It starts off by saying something that you need to think about to see if you understand what this means. Because it says, where a vendor statement is not given or certified as required by this Act. Now think about that for a minute. Bill spent last week talking with you about Form 1s. Form vendor statement. And tonight we talked about the fact that there's no cut-off, there's no amount of money. Right? Even if someone spent $8 million buying the most expensive apartment in South Australia, they still get a Form 1.
Yeah.
So what does this mean when it says here, where a vendor statement is not given? Can you think of any reason why a vendor statement would not be given?
What about, no?
There is none. Right? There is no circumstance in real estate where a vendor statement should not be given. Okay? And then it goes on to say, or the statement given is defective. And in this Act, it does not define the word defective.
Yeah, I had a question about that, actually.
What does defective mean?
Oh, no, with a lot of the searches,
Yeah.
some of the information, often from the strata, and sometimes the council information, is like a third-generation copy, which is barely legible.
Right.
So if you get something like that, can the purchaser or the purchase conveyancer say, look, this is such a poor quality copy, I can't read it, it's defective, give me a better quality copy?
Okay, that's an interesting definition of defective, and it could be. So yes, there would be a responsibility on the person putting it together to produce a document that is legible, that can be clearly read. It's not what they traditionally mean as defective, but it's a very interesting question, because it could be. I had a document this week that somebody scanned me, the document, and I think in the scanner it had moved, and the front page was incredibly blurred, and you could not read names on the front page. And I had to ask them to rescan me the front page, just one page. The rest of it was quite clear. So yes, that is, if a document is not legible, that certainly could be defined as defective, right? But it's not the actual meaning that they're talking about in this Act, or the way this section has been interpreted. What it goes on to say was that if a purchaser believes that a document they've been given is defective, they can go to court and they can ask the judge to make certain rulings, right? And it says, here on the next page, page 14, talks about what they are. The judge has got the right to avoid the contract. That means cancel the contract. And make such other orders as the court thinks necessary to restore the parties to their respective positions before the contract. So in other words, the judge can say, vendor, take back the house. Give the purchaser back their money. Real estate agent, give the vendor back the commission. Everybody go back to where they started because this document was defective. How long has a purchaser got to be able to apply under Section 15 for that to happen? What do you think is a fair amount of time? Guess.
Well, 30 days. Oh, no, it doesn't specify though, does it?
Well, it doesn't specify here, but there is something else that specifies it. Apart from murder, in which there is no time limit, any other civil action is limited to
3 years.
6 years. Close, you're in the right idea. Okay, so a buyer has got 6 years from settlement to decide whether or not they were given a document that was defective and to go to court if they think it is and apply to get their money back. Okay, now I'm raising this because this actually happened in a couple of cases, right? Now, the Form 1 that you've got in front, that Bill gave you, here we go. If you look at that Form 1 that I handed out to you before, okay, at the bottom of the page, the front page, it says page 1 of 19, right?
Yep.
And the last page, where the purchaser signs acknowledging that they've got receipt, is page 19 of 19.
Yep.
This is the way Form 1s should be done. They didn't used to always be done that way. They used to sometimes be numbered only page 1 to 6, which was the page of the questions, and then everything else was just marked as an attachment. When it was marked as an attachment, you could not prove that whether or not you had given it to the buyer, right? By now changing this around, right, and the buyer actually signs on the back page, the highest numbered page, they can't now say, oh, I didn't get such and such a page. If it's 19 of 19, it's very obvious that all 19 pages are there. So I'm saying this also to you as conveyancers. If you will be required or asked to prepare documents, more and more we've got these Form 1 companies that are coming up, right, which are basically conveyancing companies that do the Form 1s and the Form 2s on behalf of the vendors. So you may be required to prepare a document, a Form 1 or a Form 2.
Yeah.
So you've got to make sure that you number it correctly so that all of the information is inside and the page where the purchaser signs to say they've got it is the last page with the highest number. Then they've got evidence that they got every document and they can't say later. That's how they got out of it. They said, we never got a particular sheet, and the agent couldn't prove they did because they hadn't numbered all of the pages. So these are now done, and that's to show you exactly how they should be done. And that is defective. All right. So we have looked at the Act. As I said, 42 sections in the Act, but we've only looked at about 4 or 5 of them that are, 3 of them that are very, very special to businesses, and the other 2 that are important, whether it's for businesses or for property, that you need to be aware of. So that is the Act. The next thing we're going to do tonight, put that there. Here we go. I know you can hear me, Bill, but I've got to say to you, it is very complicated when you photocopy these things upside down and back to front. It makes it very difficult for the students to be able to understand them. I can say it because I'm a lecturer.
You'll just lie.
There you go, here's the Form 2. So this is another one of those documents also, I'm afraid, which is upside down as well.
I hoped we might get the AXA one, because I noticed, like, this one that we got the Form 1 for the regs
Yes?
is really substandard to the AXA one, because the AXA one is formatted so much better, it's so much easier to follow, and it's paginated, whereas the Form 1 we got from the regs wasn't, and we've got a Form 2 the same from the regs rather than the AXA one.
Yes, you have. I haven't. I've got the REI one, which is much easier for me to deal with, so I'm sorry, but I do have life a little easier.
Yes.
This is the one that we print off in our office, so it's just the one I'm used to. But all right, so we have a document, right, which we've been talking about. Section 8 says that if the business is under $300,000, excluding the stock, excluding the land, then the buyer must be given this disclosure document, and that marks the beginning of their cooling off when they get this document. So there it is in front of you, and on the front page it's telling you what's involved, and you've got Part A, Part B, Part C, Part D. You've got a Part E with a little asterisk by the side of it, does it? On yours as well? I'm sure it does.
Yes.
Part E, yes. Then it says Schedule 1, and then Schedule 2 also has a little asterisk. Right? Now, any time you see a little asterisk like that, little mark in a real estate document, do you know, what does it mean? That's a cross you've actually got there, yeah. In fact, it looks more like a sword, doesn't it?
Yes.
But what does that mean? When you see that, what is it warning you?
Something regarding that. Some notes you have to.
Well, you know, what it means is it may or may not be applicable. Maybe it's not going to be. The reason it's there in this case, Part E and Schedule 2 relate to if you are selling land. So if the business, there's no land involved, then you cross out, there won't be a Part E and there won't be a Schedule 2. Right? So that's just to let you know. Anytime you see one of those little symbols, it means this may not be applicable. So you've got to make a decision. Is it applicable in this case? So now you go down, and what is Part A? On the front page, Part A is telling you who are the various people involved in the transaction. The purchaser, purchaser's agent may be. There may not be. Most deals there is no purchaser's agent. So you would cross that out. The vendor, vendor's agent, there may or may not be. It might be a private sale, or it might be a sale where the vendor has an agent. So, but again, you can cross that out depending upon what it is. Then on number 5, the date of the contract. Right? If the contract has been done before you've issued this document, you've got a contract date. If it's afterwards, then there's nothing there. What the business is, and number 7, description of the land. Once again, number 7 has got one of those marks. If you're not, if you're selling a shop in Westfield Shopping Centre, you're not selling any land. So all of that gets crossed out.
So you actually strike it out.
You strike it out, you Z it out. Okay. Now, Part B of this talks about the cooling off. We've been talking about cooling off most of the last half hour or so. So it says to the buyer, you've got 5. If you choose to do so, you've got 5 days to change your mind. Right? Now, exactly like the Form 1, it then tells the buyer, if they change their mind, there are 4 ways that they have to. One of 4 ways they do it. Right? Exactly like the Form 1 that you did with Bill last week. And they've either got to give it to the vendor personally, post it by registered post, send it by fax or email to an address, or leave it at an address. Right? So there's the same 4 ways apply here. And that's just telling the purchaser how, if they choose to do so, they can cool off. The next page has got Part C of the document. Now this is where the vendor, I remember I said to you, the vendor signs off to say that the information is correct. So here in Part C, it's addressed to the purchaser, and you've got a space there for the name, either a person or people, of their address. being the vendor, set out that the information in Schedule 1 is correct. We'll see what Schedule 1 is in a minute. And that these are the particulars that you are entitled to get under Section 8 of the Act section we just looked at. Then there's another sentence. The sale of the business involves the sale of land. Right? But you'll see there's a mark at the beginning of that. So once again, if it's a shop in Westfields or any shop where there's not, that gets crossed out. And then the vendor signs it. Okay? So in most cases, that gets crossed out. Part D. Now this is the part that the vendor doesn't fill in. This is the certificate of the accountant. So the accountant gives me, if I'm selling a small business under 300, the vendor tells his accountant, we need a Form 2, we need you to do your part. So this is what I get from the accountant. Where the accountant gives me the figures of the business for the last 3 years and fills in this Part D that says these figures are correct. And you'll see the accountant dates it and signs it. Right? So as the buyer, you've now got a document. Part C is signed by the owner, who's saying it's correct. Part D is signed by the accountant, who's saying it's correct. So you're starting to think, well, maybe I can trust this document. You know, I've got two people telling me this information is correct. Now you've got here Part E. We talked about Part E on the front page. If you're selling real estate and you've done the searches, this is where the agent has to sign to say he's done the searches. No real estate, no searches. Part E, it's got a big little cross at the top of it, so Part E gets crossed off. Right? So in 99 times out of 100, if you ever see a Form 2, Part E will be crossed out because there will be no land. Right? Only the very rare one, when there's land, will there be a Part E.
Oh, so okay, so that's only if there's land.
Only if there's land is Part E to be filled in.
Sure.
So now for the next couple of pages you will see is the financial information of the business for the last 3 years. This is what the accountant sends through, and this is part of the Form 2 that is given to the buyer. So that the buyer can work out what do they think this business is worth. Well, there's the figures for the last 3 years, and so now, whoops, down to 44 minutes. Stop. Here we go, going again. All right, only got a bit more to go. Then you'll, we've got it onto 3 lots. Okay. So now you see, on my version it says page 8. I'm not sure whether it says page 8 on the bottom of yours. Some of the numbers different. But
There's no page numbers.
okay. So this is starting with now question 1. Can you see question 1 on the edge? That talks about how long has the vendor carried on the business. Yes?
Vendor has carried. Okay, so in Schedule 1, Division 2. is
Schedule 1, Division 2.
Okay, so that's just after all the graphs.
Yes, after all of the figures,
Yeah.
you go, which will, because you haven't got any figures, so we're not going to talk about them, but that's where they go.
Yeah.
But then you go to this next part here, and as a conveyancer, by the way, if you were doing a private sale, right, there was no agent, you would fill in these 12 questions by asking these questions to the vendor, getting the vendor's answers, and then you could fill those in. This, remember I said to you there were 12 questions. These are the 12 questions, and this is the information that you gather. So the first question relates to how long has the owner owned this business? Right? And it answers, you ask, got some questions. The vendor has carried on the business for X number of years. At the present, now most businesses will be in the same location all the time. But imagine if I said to you, if you were thinking about buying a business, and I said to you, this business has been here in this shop, exactly this location, for 20 years. You think, oh, no, that's good. It's a well-known, well-established business, right? And then if I said to you, this business has been going for 20 years. For 19 years, this business was located at Elizabeth. 6 months ago, this business moved to Brighton. Is it a 20-year-old business, or is it a 6-month-old business?
6-month-old business.
It's really only, isn't it? So that's why that second question is there. Only occasionally, but occasionally it will apply that the business hasn't been in the same place all that time, and the buyer needs to know that. So if it's relevant, you fill that in. And then question 3 asks, well, what's the name of the landlord? The name of the registered proprietor. Who was the landlord of the property? So that's there. Question 2 then asks the owner all of the information about the lease. Now you understand, when you're selling a house, the title is the most important document that the owner's got, right, to prove that they own the property. Well, they don't have a title in a business, but what they do have is a lease. And that says how much rent they've got to pay, who pays the rates and taxes, all those. So these are the questions which are here in question 2. All of the information that a buyer needs to know. How long is the lease? When did it start? When will it finish? Is there a right to extend it? How much is the rent? Who pays the extras? That's all there. Then it goes on and asks a couple more questions. Have there been any notices from the landlord? Some leases, every 5 years, it says in the lease, the tenant's got to paint the outside or the inside. Right? If that's the case, has the landlord given them a notice that says in the next 6 months you've got to paint? You have to tell the buyer if that's the case. Right? Or has the council served any notice on the landlord to say that this building is not in good repair, it needs to be repaired? Those sorts of things. The tenant needs to know that. So those questions there deal with that. Then you have question 3. Now if you think about probably the most common business, I look around and a number of you have got water on the table. You've gone into a shop, a lunch bar or somewhere, and you bought a bottle of water. That's probably the most common thing that most of us do, especially when we're working. When you walk into most lunch bars, just picture the one that you go in most days of the week to get your lunch. You walk in the door, and somewhere near the front door, there'll be a drinks fridge. Maybe it's a Coca-Cola, maybe it's a Pepsi or a Schweppes, right? They're almost every... If that fridge has got the brand name of a company on it, it probably doesn't belong to the owner of the business. It belongs to Pepsi or Schweppes or Coke, okay? So in most businesses, there are some bits of equipment that they don't own. The suppliers give them to use as long as, if you've got a Coke fridge and you put Pepsi in it, Coke will not be happy, right? They'll come and take it away very quickly. So that's the rules, okay? But as long as you do the right thing, Coke will leave that fridge there. So here in question 3, they're asking, are there anything in the shop which it's there and it will stay there, but the owner doesn't own it? So you've got to tell them, there's a Coca-Cola fridge. Coke don't charge any rent for it. They don't. They leave it there. All you've got to pay is the electricity to run it. If it breaks down, they'll come and replace it. But you don't own it. They will always own it. So that's just... You can stop using it. You can decide.
Stop.
Stop.
You can't stop
Can
it.
you put it in the store?
That's right. If you put somebody else's products in the Coke fridge, you won't have your Coke fridge very long. Right. Also, and this applies more to houses, but every now and then it applies to businesses, there might be something personal in a shop, right? Maybe some owners go and bring their own paintings and paint them on the walls to make the place look just a bit more friendly, right? And they always say, look, when I'm selling, when I go, I'm taking those paintings with me. So here, there's a place there, if there's anything that the buyer sees that will not stay in the business, again, you let them know, right? That you're buying this business, but you're not buying the skeleton in the corner, right? That belongs to Bill, and when he goes, he's taking it with him, right? That's it. So
the same as you do with the houses.
Exactly. As I say, it's more common in a house that there are things like curtains and light fittings. People say, that's sentimental, I want to take it. Yeah. But sometimes in a business.
Yeah, sure.
Now, question 4 only applies if it's a food business. If it's not a food, it obviously makes no sense. But it's just wanting to know, has the business had any orders under the Food Act? Like, is it dirty? The council's come round and said, this business needs to be cleaned up. it's not sanitary the way it's being run. Sorry?
How would you know that?
Well, you've got to ask the vendor that.
So you're relying on the
or,
vendor.
and you can, if you have any concern, if you look at the business and you think, you
Do
can
you physically go and look at the businesses?
well, from my point of view, I can't sell a business without seeing it.
Okay.
From your point of view as a conveyancer, sometimes if there's no broker involved, you might want to, just for exactly that sort of thing, is there anything I should know about this business that maybe a 5-minute trip to go and look at it will just tell me something.
So are you obliged to make further inquiries if you don't trust the... If you think the
Well,
vendor's not
common
not
sense,
making
if you look at
disclosure?
it and it's absolutely filthy, right? And he says, no orders. Pick up the phone to the council and say, can you tell me is there any health orders on such and such a
So
property?
is the council the first point of call?
Council would be your first point of call. They put the health orders on. Yep.
Thank you.
Now, question 5 deals with asbestos registers. Okay, so before 1960, almost any building that was built before 1960 had a lot of asbestos in it, because in those days they didn't understand that asbestos was dangerous. Okay, virtually any building that's been built since 1960, there's no asbestos. But the law says that the landlord, the owner of a property, has to have a register which tells a tenant if there is asbestos. So if you're looking at a building that was built in the last 20 years, there's obviously no asbestos, there's not a worry. But you're looking at a business that's running, say like Jetty Road, Glenelg. Some of those buildings there are 50, 60, 70 years old. There might be. So again, you ask the question, is there asbestos? Is there an asbestos register? And the answers have to be given here, okay, in question 5. These days, 90% of the time the answer is no, because the buildings are much more modern than that and there's no problem with it, right?
They can't sell the business if there's asbestos in it?
So, no, they can sell it, but you've got to make sure the buyer is aware that they are notified that in the roof. I mean, asbestos, if it's not damaged and just sitting there, doesn't really cause a problem. But when it gets damaged and then it starts to crumble, that's when the little flakes get in the air, that's when it can cause serious illness to people. So that's why they have to be told, right? When somebody may choose, I don't want to buy this business. I'm concerned about the asbestos, so I don't want to buy that business, right? So you can't not tell them if it's there, if it's an old business building. Clause 6 talks about what's happened. We said that the figures provided by the accountant are up till the 30th of June each year, the most recent 30th of June. So question 6 is saying, since the end of the last financial year, the last 30th of June, has anything changed? Now, right now we're talking about September. 30th of June is only 8 weeks ago. It's usually pretty certain. But if I'm selling a business in March or April, the 30th of June is 9 or 10 months ago. So maybe there might be some changes. So that's what question 6 is talking about, and that's also what question 7 is talking about, whether there's been any changes in the way the owner is doing anything since the end of the last financial year. Question 8, now remember this document is normally given to a buyer before a contract is made. So if you look at question 8, it says the asking price of the business, not the sale price, the asking price. And it's 3 parts to it. First part says, what's the asking price, excluding the stock, excluding the land? What is the owner asking just for the goodwill of the business? Okay. Then the second part says, what's the value of the stock? So it's a different amount of money. Third part, what is the total value of the business, including the stock, but excluding the land? Right? So there's 3 different things they're asking for. Question 9 wants to ask about how the business is owned and who works in it comes afterwards. So does the business operate as a company, a sole trader, a partnership, an association, or a charity. It's got to be one of those, right? Can't be anything else. So it's just a question of saying which one it is.
But what does it mean then when it says or other?
Or charity or other organisation.
Other organisation.
Yeah. So not for any other not-for-profit or type organ. I mean, again, that's very rare that they would own a business, but it's just there. Does the vendor work in the business? That's a yes or no answer. Does any other person work in the business? That's a yes or no answer. If the business is a partnership, are all of the persons who work in the business partners? It's a very difficult question if the business is not a partnership, right? Because it doesn't sort of give you the ability to say not a partnership. But so you've normally just got to say no. Only a certain number of businesses are partnerships. Most businesses are owned in the name of a company, which is not a partnership, it's a different thing. Right? So question 4 is invariably no. Has the vendor ever been registered with work cover? Now, simple rule, if a business employs any staff, it must be registered with work cover. So if there is staff involved, the answer to that will almost certainly be yes. If yes, is the vendor still registered with work cover? Well, if there are still staff involved, then the answer again will be yes. That's normal. Okay. Question 10. The 2 biggest problems in the sale of business, or 3 biggest problems in the sale of businesses. The first one is, from a buyer's point of view, can you trust the figures? Right? Are the figures right? Well, we try to overcome that by getting the figures signed by the accountant. The second biggest worry for the buyer of a business is the lease. Tell me all about the lease. Is there a problem with the lease? Well, again, we try to answer that by giving you all the information about the lease. The third biggest question for buyers is about the staff. Right? How many staff? Are they all paid properly? Are they paid on the books? Is there anybody who's owed lots of holiday pay or long service leave? So staff issues are problems for buyers. So we try here in question 10 to deal with that. Now, you'll see there's only 3 lines, right? So for most businesses, there's more than 3 staff. So normally you will have to attach another sheet of paper, but giving all of the details about all of the staff that work in the business and what allowances and what they're entitled to, and whether they've got any long service leave or holiday leave, etc., etc. Question 11 goes further into that. Is there any long service leave? Is there any annual leave, any sick leave or any other leave? But that has to be paid for by the purchaser, because the purchaser needs to know who's going to pay it.
So the accrued entitlements.
Any accrued entitlements, right? Now, in most cases, or in almost every case, any legally accrued entitlements are the vendor's responsibility. So, what do I mean by legally accrued? Well, under just about every award, wherever you work for, every one of you would normally be entitled to at least 4 weeks leave a year, right? If you work for a year, you're entitled to 4 weeks holiday. If you work for 10 years for the same employer, you are entitled, under just about every award in Australia, to long service leave. 13 weeks paid holiday as long service leave on top of your normal leave. Okay? That's 10 years. But most awards say at 7 years, you're entitled to 70%. At 8 years, 80, 9 years, 90, right? So if someone's been working for a firm for 7 years, they are already entitled. But what about someone who's been working for 6 years? Or 5 years? No. Yes.
7 years full-time working or part-time working?
It can be these days now. It can, if you are permanent part-time, always the same hours, you get an entitlement.
Okay.
Yes. But a casual, well, some weeks you're on, some weeks you're off, no. Right?
Oh, no.
Permanent casual now or something, isn't it?
Casual, if you are working for the same employer on casual basis, but you got regular work,
Regular hours, yes.
coming in weekly, You are entitled exactly the same in
Yes.
South Australia.
Yeah.
Been there, done that.
Yeah, so that's, you're right. So it gets more complicated. And it also gets complicated if there's a person who's been employed for 5 years or 6 years, right? That's often an area in negotiation between a buyer and a seller, right? Because legally, the seller doesn't have to do anything for someone who's been there under 7 years. But obviously, if you're a buyer, you're not happy if they've been there 6 years and next year, after you've only employed them for 1 year, they're going to be entitled to 7 years.
You're going to have to pay.
Yeah. So once you get over 5 years, on almost every transaction, there's a negotiation, right? But they work out what's it going to be, and usually it comes off the price.
So it's like an adjustment.
It's an adjustment between the vendor and the purchaser.
Okay, you're taking on this staff and this business, so I'm going to... Yeah, okay.
Yep, that's how it works.
Sure.
Question 12.
Yep.
Who lodged the vendor's income tax return? So you want the name of the accountant. The major reason you want that is this document, Form 2, is signed by an accountant. If you saw that the person who lodged the tax return of this business every year was ABC Accounting, but this Form 2 was signed by XYZ Accounting,
Raise suspicion.
it would raise suspicion, wouldn't it? That why has he gone to a different accountant to do this? So that's why you know it's the normal accountant of the business. You can double check that on question 12. Question 13, not question 13, the last page is a list of documents that may be included. They don't all have to be included, and there will be extra documents. The different things that would need, it says at the top, there are no documents, or it says the following documents. So one of those two statements is got to be crossed out, and then you just look through and see what is going to be included in the document. I mean, if there was a lot of staff, more than 3 people, you might have a separate sheet for the staff, so that would be an extra page that would be included, and anything else. And then the purchaser signs down here on the bottom to say that they have been given this document. Right? So that is the Form 2. I think it's a slightly easier document than the Form 1, but that's because I'm very familiar with it and I use it all the time. You may find it's not so easy because you won't use it all the time. You might go for 5 years as a conveyancer and never see a Form 2 because your firm just may not get any settlements of businesses, right? They too tend to happen with the same conveyancing firms that specialise in business. You were going to ask something?
Yeah, with this about the rate of pay all employees and something,
Yep.
there's nothing there that says that they're warranting that they're paying the person the award rate.
No. Oh, no, but it does. Up here it tells you. It tells you the rate, what the rate of pay. So that's able to be checked as to whether that is, because that's a matter of public record. What all the various awards
but
are.
Whose responsibility would be to check that? The conveyancer for the purchaser, the accountant for the purchaser, the purchaser.
The purchaser themselves should double check it to make sure that it's the correct award and it's the correct amount, that the vendor has been paying people correctly. The vendor's accountant may or may not have checked that.
Yeah,
but if you're the buyer, it's your role to check everything.
But it doesn't say though. But you can't check it though unless you know like what award it is and what the classification is under the award, and it doesn't say to put that there either.
No, it doesn't say that. But again, if you know what the business is, so then you know what the industry is, so you can make inquiries. It's not difficult to go to someone like the Chamber of Commerce and say, I'm looking at this. What award would those people be employed under? And then they will be able to tell you. So a buyer can, without too much difficulty, a buyer can double check that these things are correct.
So if you bought a business and you found out later on that the employees hadn't been paid correctly,
yes,
would you be liable for the back pay they weren't paid, or the person that sold you the business?
Okay, the employee would probably come to you. However, under the terms of the contract, and next week we'll deal with the contract, and there is space in the contract where the owner takes the responsibility that they have paid correct wages. So if it turns out they haven't, it does actually end up going back to the old owner.
Okay. So it would be in the contract,
Yes.
but it's not in the Form 2, or it's not...
No,
under
because
the
that's a
NAC or
government
something.
form, and the government form, they didn't really understand it. I mean, look, as an active broker, I can tell you there's lots of things that should be in that form that aren't. And we have told the government on lots of occasions, and they don't like to be told.
Because almost every other day you hear on the news about people, like usually overseas students and stuff, being paid really, really being robbed blind and
Yes.
stuff like that. It happens all the time. So.
It seems to. At the moment, there's been a whole spate of that. But if you're buying a business, yes, that's one of the things you should be checking.
And some of them are big businesses.
Oh, some of them are very big.
franchises.
Some of them are very big businesses. Yeah. Yes.
Can I ask a question?
No.
Okay. Now, you're talking about after number 11, which was the leave, and then number 12. Then you said on the last page you signed the form.
Where?
But we can't find that page. We've got table of particulars with 3 columns for...
Go to the very, very, very back of the document.
We have several...
Yes, you have. You've got the document. What they have printed off. If you were selling the business with land, that's the documents, because
then you do the table
that's
of
all the
particulars.
questions about the land. Go to the very, 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 very back of that, the
this is
very,
here
very
for that
final
purpose, so
page.
only if it's filling with land,
Yeah.
then we fill out this.
Then,
table of particulars.
otherwise, none of those are relevant.
Okay, so the very end, which is okay.
There's a section to sign.
Where's the section to sign? I can't see that either.
No page sign.
Can you see?
Any other?
Have I got-
Further information. Before that, it's mixed-use development, buying off the plan,
Can you
contract
just show
guarantee,
lots? Yeah.
date of notice order, terms of notice.
Okay.
Missing.
But no
It's
red
missing.
lines.
It's actually missing.
Oh!
It's actually...
I'm so stupid.
No, you're not stupid. What it is, let's hang on. Here's this Form 1 that you've got. Here you go. Right. You see on the back of the Form 1, there's an acknowledgement of receipt. Okay. So in this Form 2, which is the one I've got here, which is the one the proper one,
Very similar to that. Yeah.
you'll see the back page is the same thing.
Okay.
It lists things that may be attached,
Yeah.
and there's a space there.
So that's a prescribed form anyway.
Yes, so that's what it would look like if you actually did it properly. The last page is where the purchaser signs and acknowledge they've received it, right? That's how it comes off the print.
Trying to confuse us.
Yeah, no, sorry, didn't realise that. All right. Now, sorry? Yeah, the Act says, not the Act, the instructions from TAFE say that this lecture goes from 6:30 to 9:30. So, what do you get told? Sorry?
30 to 9.
To 9. 9, okay. All right. Sorry, no. Well, I'm finished, so you guys have got to sit here for 40 minutes. No, yeah. We're done for tonight. Right? This is the shorter of the two. Next week, when we look at the 2 contracts, it will probably be a little bit longer. It takes because that's a bit more complex. But for tonight, we are done. So unless you've got any more questions, or unless you want to sit here and I'll go and you can stay for 40 minutes, that's entirely up to you. But I'm out of here. As I say, unless you have some more questions.